The Xbox 360 entered the scene in 2005, pioneering the 7th generation console race. It was met with lots of positive reception, which persisted even after the PlayStation 3 launched 1 year later. In 2006, Nintendo responded in kind with the Wii, which is a console whose main feature is motion controls, and it worked. The Wii was a rapidly selling system, and regardless of the quality of the controls, people absolutely loved it. But both Microsoft and Sony wanted a piece of the pie, with Microsoft having the most interesting take on what motion controls would look like on the Xbox 360. As such, Microsoft took the controller away from the gamer and instead allowed their bodies to control their systems. This was the Kinect, a product that was incredibly successful, but somehow ultimately a failure. The Xbox 360 launched in 2005, and it was designed around it being a great sit-down and play experience with crazy good performance when compared to something like the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and even its predecessor, the original Xbox. Not to mention that the 360 was meant to be great for competitive online gaming thanks to their incredibly robust Xbox Live services. This was the industry's status quo, as it was seemingly moving in that direction and there wasn't much room for gimmicks or even casual play. But it was quite the opposite. After the underwhelming sales performance of the GameCube, which was a system that was focused on power at the expense of file formats and built-in online connectivity, Nintendo launched a system that wasn't about power at all, but rather, it was just a little more powerful than its predecessor, the Nintendo Wii. This system was focused on changing the way that you play games rather than improving on the same formula. The Wii was centered around motion controls, with two halves of the same controller, and it was very interactive. Because of the inclusion of Wii Sports into every launch unit, at least here in the States, many were able to experience actually moving and even sweating from playing, which was not super common within the context of video games. Not to mention that the Wii made gaming so much more accessible for people of all ages, even to those who have never played a video game before. So for the most part, depending on the game, you weren't memorizing any button combinations, you were just moving the controller as if you were performing a real-world action. This wasn't as appealing to competitive gamers, but it was extremely attractive to quite literally everyone else. This was a large contributor as to why the Wii was so popular, but it was also about the many fantastic first and third-party games that came to the Wii, as this was a platform that was widely supported. As popular as gaming was in the 90s and early 2000s, it was still confined to 1 to 2 demographics of gamers, and the Wii was a massive contributor in turning the everyday person into casual gamers. So both Microsoft and Sony took notice of this, as the Wii wasn't really even competing with them anymore. Everyone had either an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 at home, but they also had a Wii with either one of those systems, meaning that the Wii was an even greater staple than either one of those systems were at that time. Microsoft in particular had been dealing with the sins of the manufacturers behind the 360's chipset, which caused them to lose over $1 billion. Everyone dubs this phenomenon as the Red Ring of Death. The Xbox brand was still going strong, considering what just happened, and Microsoft even had plans to release a whole new revision of the Xbox 360, the S or Slim model, as we all know it as. Now, Microsoft's goals were to implement motion controls to take advantage of the success of the Wii, not by creating a whole new system, but by implementing them into the already existing Xbox 360. This means that it needs to be cheaper than the Wii, but also fresh, strictly in Microsoft's own way. In this case, without a controller of any kind for the player to hold. This led to the eventual development of the Kinect. Now, the idea behind the Kinect actually came from a company called PrimeSense, who had been working on developing a technology that would allow you to interact with your television without a remote of any kind, using gestures to navigate menus from your couch. This technology was also intended to map the human body so that it can detect movements from any part of your body. It was after the Wii proved how successful motion controls could be that Microsoft realized that they could do something with that technology. So Microsoft decided that the best way of going forward with the concept of adding motion controls to the Xbox 360 was by removing the need for a controller if you're going to be moving around anyway. Hence, Project Natal was born. In 2009, Microsoft announced the details around Project Natal, showing off what it is and will be capable of. They showed a camera sensor that tracks your movements and even showed off how it can be used in a variety of situations, including when staring down your avatar in the selection menu or in different games. Natal seemed to be capable of tracking your movements in real time and then recreate it in-game. Some of the examples shown at this presentation were far from impressive, but others definitely drew excitement, especially as you could be so much more active than with just a mere controller. But the real attention grabber during this presentation was honestly Project Milo. This was set to be an AI-powered game that leveraged the Natal sensor's cameras and microphone to create a fully interactive game about building a friendship with the subject, Milo. You could ask him questions, get feedback, show him drawings, and he could even tell the difference in your tone of voice, among so many other things. The world was in absolute awe, seeing as so much could be done with Milo, but also with this sensor. How far has technology really come at this point? Excitement was overwhelming, and gamers could not wait to see what Natal would bring to their homes. In 2010, Microsoft launched Natal with its finalized name, the Kinect. The Kinect itself is a device that hosts one RGB camera that captures the actual video feed of you moving, and then the two 3D depth sensors that offer two different methods of detecting depth. First, you have the depth map, which is created by scanning you and the environment and operates based off of what objects are in focus and which ones are blurrier. It determines that the objects that are in focus are the ones closer to the sensor, and the ones that are blurrier are further away, calculating distances or depth rather in this manner. The system then creates a depth map using speckles, with the larger speckles representing the objects that are closer and the smaller ones representing the objects that are further away. Then you have the depth from stereo, which uses parallax, meaning that this one was in charge of determining different angles by analyzing the shift in size of the speckle patterns to determine if the figure has adjusted itself in a different orientation. These sensors worked in tandem to ensure that the Kinect would give as accurate a read as possible regarding the player's movements. The Kinect even featured motors that allowed it to tilt when needed. You would especially notice these when you first connected to your Xbox 360, as the Kinect would start tilting up and down on its own. By the time the Kinect was released, it could be purchased in two ways, either bundled with the Xbox 360S or separately, but it was only compatible with the Xbox 360S as it used a customized USB port that was not found on previous 360 models whatsoever. The hardware and the concept of the Kinect was incredibly interesting, as there were many things to consider. The Wii launched in 2006, and it required at least a Wii remote for games, with the ability to attach a nunchuck to play games that required the simulation of two hands instead of one. But then you had that rather annoying cable that linked both of these controllers together and even limited the range of motion of certain people, as you could only spread them so far. Initially, the Wii remote did not have a gyroscope either, and it relied on a rather janky setup that did suffer from missed inputs or even inaccurate results from movements that seemed natural to the person. This was alleviated later on with the addition of the Wii Motion Plus accessory, but that was yet another piece of hardware that gamers had to attach to their setup. The PlayStation Move offered fully wireless controllers on the other hand, but these were chunkier controllers that would still get uncomfortable to use after a while, and also the batteries would eventually run out. Whatever you do within its field of vision, it should be able to mimic in different games without the need to deal with wires or even taking breaks to recharge the batteries. It was always meant to work. There were so many plans for this platform regarding what games would show up and how well they would be played with such an interesting proof of concept. The Kinect looked like it was so much further ahead than the competition, but that would unfortunately prove to be untrue. The Kinect ended up getting a decent amount of games, especially considering that there were millions of Kinect sensors in people's homes. The Kinect ended up with games like Kinect Sports, Kinect Adventures, Dance Central, with Kinectimals among many others, with other games such as Fable, The Journey, Fruit Ninja, Dead Space 3, Sonic Free Riders, and Forza Motorsport 4. Some of these just had Kinect capabilities, even if they weren't meant to be played entirely with a sensor. Once you install the Kinect onto the 360, it will bring you to a setup screen where you have to calibrate the sensor, and this lets you navigate the main 360 interface until you reach a game. Now, one game that exemplifies what the Kinect sensor is capable of and isn't is Dragon Ball Z for Kinect. This game utilizes your entire body to play, where you would be expected to kick, punch, swing, gesture for energy attacks, and more. But this does come with the jank of using a system like this. Missed inputs are quite common, and you need a lot of space for the Kinect to get you into frame. For a bedroom, this will not work. For most New York City living rooms, this will not work. But if you have a sizable space, then this could be fun for you. But many Kinect games do suffer from a lot of the same issues. Now, navigating menus feels clunky and slow. And like I said, if you don't have a lot of space, then the Kinect will lose you pretty often, and it does require a good amount of overhead from my experience. But Kinect games were still fun, and they were definitely playable under the right circumstances. Now, this technology was really cool, since the Wii or the new PlayStation Move were not able to work in the same way that the Kinect did. However, there was a very important game that was the main driving force of people's interest towards the Kinect: Project Milo. And this is because Project Milo was never brought to fruition due to it simply never actually being ready for prime time. The man who would speak of the Project Milo was Peter Molyneux, and he definitely over-exaggerated the details of this project. Many implications of what Milo would actually be capable of were brought from the trailer at E3, where Milo seemed to remember important details about the player's personal life, be able to have complex conversations, and even engage in interactive minigames with the player. So Peter Molyneux oversold the promise of Project Natal when it wasn't anywhere near ready to actually be shown, or Project Milo rather. Those behind the production of the game were even concerned that the illusion behind Milo could easily be broken at that time. This was a huge reason for people becoming invested in the Kinect at first, so it was puzzling and certainly disappointing when this was never actually released to the public at all. Now, this was just one aspect that drew many to feel disappointed about the Kinect, but there was so much more that Microsoft holds a lot of responsibility for. This was the downfall of the Kinect, as it was truly imminent. The Kinect was actually very successful upon its launch, even at its relatively high $149 asking price. It ended up selling about 8 million units in roughly 2 months, which was a huge accomplishment. Yet so much happened with the Kinect in the middle of it all that caused it to lose steam pretty quickly. Now, one of those is that Microsoft wanted to remove the Natal processor from the Kinect in order to lower its cost. It ended up keeping the processor, but it was severely downgraded to the point where developers had to offload a decent chunk of processing to the Xbox 360 itself. This significantly reduced the capabilities of what the Kinect would be able to do, but it even caused many projects to be thrown to the wayside or be heavily changed due to this drastic shift. Project Milo was completely cancelled as it was designed around the initial specs of Natal. This is also important because the precise skeletal tracking that was initially intended was no longer possible with this processor. So games such as Kinect Sports, which was one of the most important Kinect titles, had to be greatly simplified. Because of the lack of precise skeleton scanning, the Kinect feels like it just makes its best guess as to what you're actually doing rather than detecting what you're actually up to. Oftentimes, that guess is not really the most accurate. There was even a Star Wars game that would allow you to actually play with a digital lightsaber that unfortunately was reduced to a collection of minigames. The decision to nerf the Kinect for the purposes of lowering costs was one that hurt the overall viability of this product. Unfortunately, with the lack of core exciting games for the Kinect, as many of them got cancelled or reworked, hardcore gamers just weren't interested in this. To make things worse, not even the casual gamer was really that interested either, because there weren't that many games anyway. Many of these games turned out to be just quick casual fun that wasn't always as good as playing with 2 Wii remotes, with you needing much more space to actually get that to happen. So many gamers ended up using it as a microphone from a distance for online play, and that's where the Better with Kinect label comes in. Since the capabilities simply weren't there anymore, there just weren't very many exciting titles made for it, and even for those that tried implementing Kinect capabilities, those were largely ignored and proved not to be worth the investment in some cases. But there is one aspect of the Kinect that absolutely did hurt its public perception: its forced implementation with the upcoming Xbox One. Now, for Microsoft's upcoming 8th generation console, Microsoft had announced a myriad of disappointing features regarding the Xbox One. The system had to validate game licenses by going online every 24 hours to ensure that you were playing legitimate games. Lending games to others or purchasing used games was going to be affected negatively. But of course, the Kinect was also included in every single system as an accessory that very few wanted to pay extra for, considering how poorly supported and disappointing the initial Kinect technology turned out to be. This Kinect was also required for the system to work, and it was always on. Naturally, this drove many to become skeptical about the privacy aspect of a system that was always online and always watching you through its camera. Thankfully, this idea was dropped before the system actually reached people's homes, and the Kinect was no longer required, but you still had to pay for it. Still, too much damage had already been done, and the Kinect on the Xbox One only ended up receiving 21 official games, many of which were Just Dance games. The Kinect was unfortunately not something people cared about anymore, and the initial plans for the Xbox One only made things much worse. The Kinect was meant to be a very exciting project, and many were sold on this idea. But there were far too many compromises and poorly made judgments around this product. Due to Microsoft's decision to cut costs and greatly hinder Natal's performance, many games were affected by this decision. The Xbox One's announcement also only hurt the public perception around not only the Kinect, but also Xbox as a name. With the proper support, the Kinect probably could have gone much further, but unfortunately, its history has already been written. The Kinect sold almost 30 million units, which is really impressive considering what it was. But it is worth noting that it achieved this number because it was bundled with the Xbox 360S and the Xbox One later on. The Kinect is not a concept that I believe Microsoft will ever try to explore again. But as of now, they have much more pressing matters to worry about. Now, thankfully, if you never managed to play with the Kinect sensor before, then these are extremely cheap to get your hands on and try out, just to see if you can make the most out of it with your setup. But as it is, I don't think that the Kinect will ever truly be forgotten because of how exciting it was towards the build-up and how catastrophically it fell in the end. Now, there were multiple concerns surrounding Microsoft, or rather Xbox as a brand, with the Kinect being a major point of contention. However, it is well documented that a major hardware flaw during the Xbox 360's run was the most frustrating to all 360 owners. We'll talk about this one very soon, so subscribe so that you don't miss that mini documentary when it comes out. Now, thank you so much for watching. Leave your suggestions in the comments for future bite-sized documentaries, and until next time.